Next up on the podcast is Andrew Abrams, who won the Virginia 3A state title at 130 pounds in 1998 for Herndon High School. Andrew is another state champion whose journey began as a freshman in high school, and so he's another example of how even if you don't lace up your wrestling shoes until ninth grade, you can still reach the top of the podium. As always, please leave a rating and review of the podcast on Apple Podcasts or subscribe on YouTube, and let's get rolling.
He taught me to get up when I didn't want to get up, when I wanted to quit.
I had high goals, man. I've always had high goals.
And so when I won it, I was just kind of like, oh my gosh, you guys are right.
It's not the thrill of winning. It's the joy of having that personal goal and being able to achieve that and walk off the mat with your head held high and with your hand up.
That just fueled my fire, and I was in every state championship match from there on until I graduated.
That was when I really started doing the kind of wrestling that I was capable of.
Anybody that steps in the ring and just decides to commit the entire time is a state champion in my book.
Welcome back to another episode of Back Points, the podcast where top wrestlers and coaches reveal their secrets about how they won state titles in high school wrestling. Very excited to be here today with the 1998 3A state champion from Herndon High School, I believe in the 130-pound weight class, Andrew Abrams. Andrew, thank you for being here on Back Points.
My pleasure, Will. Great being here.
Did I get that right? Is it where you won at 130, right?
That is correct. My senior year at 130.
So you won the state tournament in what was described to me as the biggest upset of the tournament, where you beat the returning state champ from Great Bridge, a great wrestler, Bruce Fowler. Had you been preparing to wrestle him specifically, or did you not think about who your competition was?
Well, I wasn't necessarily going through that season thinking of him, wrestling him specifically, but I knew he was out there. We had actually participated on the national team a year prior, so I was aware of him. I was aware of his credentials, but really just took it one match at a time that season and trying to enjoy my senior year.
Did you set a goal specifically of winning the title?
Yes, I'd say that was certainly a goal, but not specifically. That was really, I hadn't accomplished winning a state title yet. It was my senior year, so certainly that was one of the motivations of that season, whoever it may be that I was wrestling.
So some people in high school have a tough time going out and wrestling and enjoying themselves. And I like how you said that you wanted to go out there and enjoy yourself. Was that something that you felt you were able to do in the moment, or were you nervous? Was there, do you feel like you were prepared in a way that allowed you to enjoy yourself on the mat?
Yes, I think throughout that season, I had an ability to enjoy myself and really enjoy the process. The nerves were constantly there, though, the anxiety at times, but an overall feeling of satisfaction with the work that I was doing certainly allowed me to enjoy the moment.
So let's go back in time for a moment to your early days in wrestling. I've talked to some of your teammates, and I know that some of them started wrestling when they were 5. As I understand it, I think you started a little later than that.
Yeah, that's correct. I started just about a year or two prior to high school. I was not really aware of organized wrestling throughout my life. To me, up until about middle school, really wrestling, it was almost WWF type wrestling. So that being said, I always enjoyed wrestling with, as a child, and just more combat sports, you could say. So there was an opportunity to meet at the high school at the time when I was a middle schooler, and I was introduced to the sport of wrestling. And that was the beginning of, the next 4-year relationship, really intensely getting into it and just loving every minute of it.
So these are my favorite stories. I like hearing about people who started wrestling when they maybe a little late, although it's funny to call middle school or even freshman year late. I mean, you're still youth, and but there's a difference between somebody who starts when they're 5 and somebody who starts when they're 13 or 14. How would you say your first couple years of wrestling went? Were you immediately good at it? Were you immediately serious about it? Or did it take you a little while to kind of build to that?
The first couple years, I would say I was immediately good at it. And I was immediately serious at it. Certainly, I've always had a competitive spirit about me. So whatever the sport or situation is, I play to win, or I set out to accomplish the objective outside the sporting realm. So yes, and I had an inclination and a certain skill level that allowed me, as soon as I began, to be considered good. I think the blessing was the people that I was surrounded by, the opportunity for me to go to that summer workshop, and then to meet some coaches and peers that would end up being with me and supporting me and facilitating my growth and development over the next 4 years.
So let's dig into that a little more. So what was the summer workshop again?
This was I'm not sure. It was a summer workshop that took place at Herndon High School prior to me going to high school. And it was, I'm not sure, I couldn't tell you where we first heard about it. My father, I expressed some interest in going. I don't think I knew any other individual going there, perhaps a friend of mine as well. But we went there, sight unseen, and there just kind of got into the mix. There was some coaching staff. There was some Herndon High School wrestlers there at the time. There might have been some wrestlers that weren't associated with Herndon High School, as well as some younger wrestlers around my age and even younger that were there, that were more experienced and more familiar with the wrestling culture at that time.
Did you immediately start wrestling with Matt Gallagher and Peter Bach?
I would say I immediately started wrestling with Matt Gallagher. That was, one of the individuals, Matt Gallagher, as well as his father, from that workshop, where they recognized me as an individual that might be able to work out and to train with Matt. And certainly, Matt Gallagher and Mr. Gallagher had all the experience in terms of, the wrestling circuit, the tournaments, and the ability to take the time and actually travel to these tournaments and participate in some of the club leagues. So that was a blessing to make their acquaintance and to begin working with them. From that point on, really from that first workshop, began a relationship with the Gallaghers, and they would introduce me to different tournaments. And if sometimes my father would drive to those tournaments, sometimes Mr. Gallagher would drive to those tournaments. And that really helped build a solid foundation for a successful high school career in wrestling. And then you also mentioned Peter Bach, and Peter Bach, he wasn't a local Virginian at the time. So I believe, it's my understanding, that his first year in Virginia was his freshman year.
Interesting. So it sounds like your early days in wrestling started when the Herndon High School put on a summer program, and then you were fortunate enough to be introduced to some people who really brought you along, brought you to tournaments, introduced you to a great practice partner, I'm assuming, in Matt Gallagher, who also won the state tournament. I believe he was a year younger than you, I believe.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and so that kind of got you off, it sounds like, on the right foot in the sport.
Absolutely. So I was grateful for those that I was able to surround myself with. And you mentioned Peter Bach as well. That's an individual that came my freshman year of high school, but certainly he was right around our weight. So whether it be Matt, Peter, or myself, we were workout partners really all 4 years of high school. And and that really helped us. Or actually, I guess 3 years with Matt, because he was a year behind us. I graduated in 98. He graduated in 99. But, even throughout that time, I could certainly say 4 years, because we were both involved in the club leagues around that.
Well, the three of you, I think, were described as the three-headed monster at Herndon for how many opponents you guys beat in succession. And so I think it sounds like you guys were pretty lucky to have each other so close in weight together.
Certainly.
Was Peter, was he always, when he came in as a freshman, was he a new wrestler, or had he wrestled for a really long time the way Matt Gallagher had?
I'm not sure if he had wrestled for as long as Matt, but I do know that he was very interested and experienced in wrestling at that time. So he came in focused to be a part of this team, to be a part of the Herndon High School wrestling program specifically. So I'd have to imagine that there was a lot of experience before then, or certainly some experience that his family was also interested in him in participating in.
So did you wrestle year round at that point?
Yeah, I would say so. Certainly it was, I would be training year round. I can say that with confidence. In terms of wrestling year round, yeah, I guess I could say that with confidence too. I mean, certainly the off season, there would be different programs, and we would be in the wrestling room. And if there was a tournaments going on, usually in the off season, now that I recall, it would be more maybe freestyle and Roman Greco wrestling as opposed to high school wrestling.
And did you do camps like the Granby camp?
Yes. Also participated in the Granby camp, Concerto camp. There was a number of those. And so that was always a nice opportunity to hone your skills, learn some new moves, and also see who else was out there, your potential opponents, friends, and just wrestlers, those that interested in the same things you were.
So do you recall in your progression through high school anything in particular that helped you take a big step forward in the sport? Something that helped you kind of go from what you would consider to be a beginner wrestler or an intermediate wrestler to somebody that was capable of beating the best wrestlers in the state?
I can't think of one particular thing, although I will say that really the skill set that helped me excel would be the discipline and the program, as well as those around me. I felt blessed to have the supports, the coaching staff, the support of my teammates. I think we all had a very positive attitude, a very healthy attitude in terms of what it meant to be a champion. We were very interested in being the best we could in a healthy way, enjoying the process and working hard. So I don't think there was a certain thing, my workout partners, the fact that they excelled in their own right, that was great for me. Just the fact that our coaching staff excelled in their own right was wonderful and was fantastic for my growth and development. But I would really just say it was the focus and maybe the mindset in terms of realizing that it was possible to be a champion. And then from there, having the inclination to do that, to put in the time, whether it be in the gym, whether it be on the mat, or just really thinking about it and reflecting on matches that we've done and figuring out what to do to get that edge or to get a little better.
Do you recall anything specific that they would have taught you as coaches about how to prepare yourself from a mindset perspective? You've mentioned that you wanted to succeed in a healthy way. Is there anything that they did to either instill that or guide you in the right direction?
Certainly, we had Coach Carl Spinnweber and Steve Sabo at Herndon High School during my tenure at Herndon High School wrestling. And in terms of what they did, they were very hands-on and masters in their craft of coaching. So I can say with confidence that they were very interested in not only the physical component, but the mental component of wrestling. Whether it be being able to perhaps brush off a loss or temper down wins, staying focused on, you can have a great match even if you don't win. You can have a bad match even if you do win. So I think there was a lot in terms of the psychological aspects of their coaching, as well as being a champion or just being a successful wrestler in general. So we always had a good attitude going into, or attempted to have a good attitude. Certainly you have your good days and bad days, but they were able to help us navigate that, I think, for the best.
I think it's so important to have the view that just because you win a match doesn't mean you wrestled well, and just because you lose a match doesn't mean you wrestled poorly. I think that goes a long way to getting a good perspective in the right mentality in the sport.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Certainly, just because you win a match doesn't mean you're wrestling at the level you want to. In fact, if your goal is winning, you might not be able to get out of that comfort zone and be interested in going head to head against someone who, has the ability to bring you to the next level. So you really need to enjoy, or at least get something out of those losses as well as the wins, because I think that's imperative in the development of a successful wrestler.
I've heard Kerry Colat say that he didn't go into a match thinking about winning or losing. He would go in thinking about different techniques. And what I liked about that is that you control the techniques that you are going to use or test when you go into that match. You really don't control the outcome, the win or the loss. I mean, you control certain aspects of that, but ultimately the ref is, going to play a role in whether you win or lose. Your opponent is going to play a role, but you completely control how you approach your technique and how you approach your match strategy. So it's interesting to me to hear how different coaches prepare their athletes to go in. And I think that when you have that kind of attitude, that it doesn't focus 100% on the final score, it really does prepare you to be calm and to approach it with the right mindset.
I would agree with that. I think, you can always, it can be a recipe for a disaster if you go in there thinking that you have the strategy and you know exactly what you're going to need to do to win. Every opponent is different. That opponent and yourself might be feeling different that day. So I think it's very productive in the beginning. It's almost like a conversation. Once you get out on the mat, to feel it out, see what the reaction is to this, what sort of technique might be appropriate in that time. Timing is a big part of it. How much time is left? How much time are you dealing with? Where are you in the mat awareness? There's a lot of different factors that come in that you need to be thinking about. So there's a lot of moving pieces, but if you can get to that point and your mind is clear enough where you can be thinking about that and just fluid in your actions, not singularly, but with your opponent as well, I think that would be, that's the recipe of a good, fun wrestling match.
So did you think about nutrition when you were wrestling in high school?
Sure. Sure, I would. I think back then I did think about nutrition. Certainly with wrestling, weight is an issue, and weight doesn't necessarily reflect health or nutrition. So besides the aspect of making a certain weight where nutrition would be a component, there were aspects of nutrition in terms of eating healthy and eating carbs that were important and were certainly we thought about. Looking back, thinking about all the pizza and burgers and steak and pasta that was eaten even days before the match, I'm not sure. I'm not sure in terms of my understanding of health and nutrition where I was on that spectrum. But yes, nutrition, health in general, health and nutrition were always a component of what we were doing as we were training and as we were preparing for matches and as we were preparing for the next session.
I know that one of your wrestling partners, Matt Gallagher, he cut a fair amount of weight certain years. Did you ever feel like you cut too much weight to get down to a certain weight class?
Yeah, I think there was times when I knew or that I understood that it was difficult for me to cut weight, and I was cognizant of being in high school in terms of the cost benefit of cutting weight. So I'm grateful enough where I would say winning wasn't necessarily such a priority for me, where I would be cutting weight to the detriment of my own personal health. But that being said, keeping the weight under control or keeping tabs on the weight was always important. I never or rarely would I be in weight classes where cutting weight wasn't an issue at all. I think throughout that time I was 103 my freshman year, 119 my sophomore year, 125 my junior year, and 130 my senior year. So I believe at 103 my freshman year I might have cut the most amount of weight to be in that class. But after that, although I was always interested in being competitive and always being at my prime wrestling weight, i.e. working out enough and having the nutrition I needed not to be necessarily overweight or have any pounds that I didn't need to succeed in what I was setting out to accomplish. I never really had to cut weight where it was hurtful to me or to my having a psychological effect. I mean, for me, it was never had to cut weight where it was problematic outside of my freshman year. I think I learned that lesson maybe throughout my first year of high school, first year of competitive wrestling in high school.
What about weight training, strength building? Did you do anything very organized around building up your strength as a wrestler?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think all 4 years of wrestling, or I know all 4 years of wrestling, weight training was a part of that, was a component of the training schedule. In our high school, I believe I had a weight training class, and we also had a gym at home, as well as we would do weight training in the summertime associated with our wrestling program. So weight training, cardio, of course, as well as just the wrestling practice and drilling in general.
Did you do cardio year round?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And the cardio at that time, it would be anything from riding a bicycle. It could be a treadmill in the winter. I always enjoyed running. My freshman year of high school, I also ran cross country. So that was helpful in that cardio and building that endurance during that time. Jump roping.
Did you feel pretty confident in matches that that cardio and conditioning was not going to be a problem for you?
Well, I would, in terms of cardio and conditioning, I always knew that our routine and our training schedule, it was rigorous enough where I felt confident that what I was doing, that I was at a certain level, at a high level in terms of my cardio and endurance. But when it comes to wrestling, when it came to my matches, there's always times when you get winded, and there would be times when my opponent may have had been able to last longer, where I would get gassed. So although I felt confident in my training schedule or training regimen, you can always, the motivation for doing that day in and day out is so you don't lose it and you only build on it.
How big was the team at Herndon when you were wrestling? Was it a full practice room with 35 guys? Was it more than that, or was it?
Well, in terms of with Herndon High School during, I guess we'd say the mid 90s, we always had a full practice room. In fact, there was only varsity in our room because we had such a big team in terms of numbers. And in terms of size and in terms of strength. The Herndon High School was a very serious wrestling school at that time. So yeah, we had our practice rooms were always filled, even on the weekends.
So I want to test your creativity here. So if you were going to advise a wrestler today who wanted to win a state title for himself or herself, and they could only do one exercise, what would that be? What's the number one exercise that you think is beneficial in training to be a high-level wrestler?
Well, I would say shadow wrestling, if you would label that as an exercise.
Sure.
I mean, jump roping, I think, was advantageous to me in terms of foot speed, in terms of that cardio and the endurance. But shadow wrestling, assuming that you don't have a partner, the more mat time you can get, the better. If nothing else, just to be able to read people's reactions, be able to read your own reactions. If someone does that, someone does a single leg takedown, what is your reaction? Are you moving your right foot back? Are you moving your left foot back? Are you creating a tail with your shoulders? So as much mat time, the more mat time you can get, the better. And when you don't have a mat, I've found it productive in terms of shadow wrestling. We're just really reflecting on a move when you're trying to literally drill that move into your mind, so you can do that seamlessly on the mat. I've always found that productive. Maybe seeing how your own body moves in terms of a combination, or just the fluidity of being able to execute a move.
I think that's great. With the coronavirus, a lot of guys are not able to get into the wrestling room these days. And, it's a bit of a question kind of exactly when we're going to be able to have partners wrestling each other the way that we're used to. And so we're advocating a lot of shadow wrestling. And I've talked to some other coaches who feel the same way. It really, if you can only do one thing right now, stance and motion, shadow wrestling is really paramount.
Absolutely.
So, did you have any pre-match rituals that you followed that you can recall? I know this is going back some years. Anything come to mind?
Let's see here. Well, for me, one of these individuals that before a match, although we did have a great crew around us, I would usually seclude myself in some ways. Not necessarily get inside my own head, but in a lot of ways, there would be a lot of quiet reflection in terms of what I'm setting certain objectives for myself, whether it be to successfully execute a new move or attempt to approach the match with from a different angle in terms of defense, offense. Some of these more high-profile matches where you're very aware of your opponent, or perhaps when you're a senior and you've gone against a certain opponent before, you can tailor your strategy specific to that match, whether it be in the environment, if you're at home or if you're away. Sometimes these tournaments happen where you get large stretches of time before the next match. And then sometimes you have a match, within a half an hour of each other. So you really need to make sure that your body and your mind is ready for that. So for me, I would find myself before a match, usually on my own, pacing at times, thinking about what I wanted to accomplish. And then prior to the match, stretching. Stretching was always very important to me. Stretching probably about 20 minutes before the match, getting a very good stretch in, and then about 15 minutes before the match, just trying to work up that sweat and get my body temperature where I want it to be.
That's great. That's great. I've always liked hearing different pre-match rituals that wrestlers go through, and I think you've outlined a good one.
Thank you. Yeah.
So you, after high school, moved down to New Orleans, and I think that's where you are right now.
That's great.
What have you been up to since you left Herndon?
Let's see here. Since I left Herndon, I finished up, graduated from Tulane University down here in New Orleans. Then I went to law school at Loyola University. So for the last 10 years, I've been practicing law, doing litigation and intellectual property down here. In the litigation side, I'll do plaintiffs and defense work representing individuals, companies, banks, and public bodies, representing school board parishes throughout Louisiana. Then in the intellectual property side, I've been representing music and musicians and artists in terms of copyright and trademark issues. So I've been doing that. I've also, let's see here, in terms of more philanthropic and not necessarily professional endeavors, I was very interested in international trade and development and education around here. I was able to be a part of a board and spend some time on creating a charter school in New Orleans, Lycée Français de la Nouvelle Orleans. And that is a French charter school, pre-K through 12 around here, that not only do you graduate from high school with a high school diploma, but you also have the opportunity to achieve a French baccalaureate. And with this French baccalaureate, it's a public school. You'll be able to go have college in-state tuition in any EU country, as well as free tuition in France. So I was happy about that. And we got that going just about 10 years ago now, when I think we got our charter. And since then, it's been steadily increasing, adding more grades to the program, and expanding throughout the community. So that's been one of the things I've been involved in. I've been active in the New Orleans World Trade Center of New Orleans, which is actually the first World Trade Center in the world, was based here in New Orleans, near the Mississippi River downtown. So I've been able to cultivate relationships and just network with individuals in different countries in terms of education, economic development, and the arts.
Those sound like fantastic endeavors, and we'll put links to those to the school and the other organization in the show notes.
Great, thank you.
If people want to learn more about it, they'll be able to click on it. And if there are any ways that you want people to get in touch with you, if you want any wrestlers to reach out to do business with you, then we can include contact information as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining. This has been a great episode of Back Points, and I know that young wrestlers are going to benefit tremendously from your experience and your story.
Well, thanks, Will. It was a pleasure being here with you today, and I look forward to all the future wrestlers out there doing their thing and getting through this coronavirus. I know it's difficult times, but I'm confident that those champions will be using this time for their benefit and only being stronger coming out on the other end.
Thanks for listening to Back Points today. If you want to support the show, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you find the show. Also, it helps us if you give the show a rating on Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Feel free to also make a donation via Patreon at patreon.com/backpoints. Thanks, and see you next episode.